For generations, the worst among us have contrived to tear our political and social fabric apart to benefit the few over the many. Their mission and intent have been diabolically simple: divide and conquer, and they have been wildly successful. Hi, I'm Michael James Ott, veteran, retired engineer and businessman, and now ambassador and facilitator for the solution to this madness: citizen statesmanship. The vast majority of people from all corners of the globe are just like you and me, extraordinary, so-called ordinary people. Join us in our quest to recreate the political landscape, eliminating the tribal hostilities and warfare incited for centuries by the label and blame mantra of our traditional leaders. It's the Pro and Con Show, brought to you today and every day by Citizen Statesmanship, the cure for what ails us. Hi there, welcome to the Pro and Con Show. I'm Michael James Ott, your host for today's show. I want to begin by emphasizing that all of these shows are for all of you, all 8 billion of you out there, the billions and billions of extraordinary, ordinary people just like us here on the show. And today's topic are NARSOLES Human. And if you haven't watched any of our previous shows, NARSOLES, narcissistic sociopathic a-holes, this is kind of the bane of our existence, us in the EOP, the extraordinary, ordinary people. So we wanted to have a little bit of a philosophical discussion, and it's going to be pretty darn interesting. But before we get to that, before we talk about whether NARSOLES are human or not, I wanted to relay my recent experience talking with you, dozens and dozens of members of the EOP, the Extraordinary Ordinary People. As it turned out, I went to a Frosty Farmer winter market over in Greenville, South Carolina. And I was equipped with my beloved hat here, Freedom, Equality, and Fairness. For those of you that aren't watching, a brief description: a light gray ball cap with Freedom, Equality, and Fairness, red, white, and blue, embroidered prominently here on the front. And I have the Citizen Statesmanship shovel here, which is a predominantly black shovel. It's called a transfer shovel, which means that the blade on it is kind of squared off. It's made for like shoveling pea gravel and this kind of thing. And it's, as I said, it's predominantly black along the handle. It's a straight handle. And we have important words on that handle. And again, for those that aren't able to watch on the video, but are listening on the audio. So we have words that clear the swamp and move the mountains. On one side of the handle, this is on a black background, they're written in white, an Arctic white basically, and the font, we were trying to go for a little bit of a Lord of the Rings kind of effect, so the font is papyrus. And then on the other side, of course, is the solution for what ails us, citizen statesmanship. So we've got the word citizen statesmanship here on the other side of the handle. And so I went there, and the first thing I did actually was encounter a young woman who was a person that was an organizer for this event. She's a regular organizer of the event, and as I walked in, she saw me, and she and I chatted, and she said, "Oh, I've been watching some of your videos, and thanks for that," and on and on. And then I told her what I was trying to do, and we had a discussion about, well, is that an appropriate thing for here? This is a farmer's market. We've got to be careful about not, making people angry or so on. And so we chatted for a while, and after a while, she's like, "Okay, well, just please be really careful about how you approach people, and we'll just see how it goes. And that's exactly what I did. So here's how I approached people. So there would be people, of course, there's plenty of, there's vendors with their booths, and they're selling all kinds of crafts and foods and things, typical farmer's market kind of thing. And there was, of course, all kinds of normal, extraordinary, ordinary people looking at these kinds of things and wondering if maybe they want to buy them or whatnot, whatever. And what I did is I would walk around with my shovel prominently here. Again, I had my shovel, my hat, and I also have a little business card with a little bit of information about the citizen statesmanship movement and basically how you find us on YouTube and on the various podcast outlets. And so I walked around, and I intentionally kept the move the mountain, clear the swamp side of the shovel outward as I approached people. And I came up to them, and I was looking for people. They were standing there maybe looking at their phones or waiting for a family member to evaluate something at one of the vendor booths or whatever. Or in some of the cases, I went to the vendors themselves. Maybe there's a booth there, and the vendor wasn't getting any interest at that moment, and so I walked up and actually spoke to the vendor in their booth. And when I did, I came up and I said, look, I'm wildly aware of two things. So one, this is a Saturday morning, and you're here to have fun and enjoy yourself, and I am wildly aware of that. And secondly, you're here to either maybe buy or sell something, and I don't want to interfere in that in any way, shape, or form. So if there's at the very first instant that you don't want to, hear from me anymore, just wave your hand or something, and I will disappear like you've never known I was here. And that seemed to be, a very open thing. A lot of people smiled and were very open to then listening. So then I said, okay, so I'm here advocating for a far brighter future, free of hate, fear, and injustice. We're going to clear the swamps. We're going to move the mountains. And the way we're going to do that is with something called citizen statesmanship. So citizen statesmanship, a lot of you probably maybe never learned, or if you did, you've long since forgotten that the founders of our country, folks like Washington and Adams and other folks like that, they were vehemently opposed to even the existence of political parties, because they were convinced they could foresee that political parties would one day tear our country apart. And they, of course, had just sacrificed so much to found this democratic republic, and they were wildly, wildly opposed to even the existence of political parties. And so citizen statesmanship is going to be us extraordinary, ordinary people like you and I, and we, it's very in kind of a method similar to jury duty, we're going to start governing ourselves. We're going to stop listening to all of the blame and, the whole blame game, the label and blame and all of the, inciting of hate and fear and injustice. We're going to stop all that, and very similar to jury duty, we're going to elect, people from ourselves. This is how we're going to do this. So, and I would say, well, have you happened to actually serve on a jury? And actually, I'm amazed. This particular day, I actually ran into, what was it, maybe 6 people or more that actually said yes. This is uncommon for me. I asked that question, did you actually serve on a jury in your lifetime? And the answer is usually no. But on this day, I ran into like 6 people, and they said, yes, that is true. I have indeed served on a jury. And I said, well, it was a positive experience. Most people think, yes, it absolutely was. And so I said, okay, so similar to jury duty, there's you know, an election, and there's a seat on the House of Representatives for this district, you know, here in Greenville. I don't know what it is, whatever it is. And so we're going to take 20 randomly selected people, you know, just like we do for jury duty, only instead of a judge and lawyers vetting them, we're going to vet them. So you get a notice in the mail. Okay, you're going to be a candidate, a potential candidate for this election year. And here's a questionnaire, and you're obliged to fill it in and send it in. Okay. And then the rest of us look at the answers to your questions, and we compare your answers to the other 20 or other 19 people that, you know, might have been randomly selected also. And then we're going to basically say, well, maybe the best way is that we rate these people. So we look at all 20 and we look at their responses. On a scale of 10, I think this person's an 8. This next person, 6. Next person's a 9. Next person's a 3. Next person's a 6. Next person, and you get the picture. And then we're going to serve, and then we're going to go home. You're going to serve a term, and then you're going to go home. And folks, you know, watching this video, people not only got it, but they embraced it. They said, you know, that's actually an outstanding idea, which it is. That's why we're advocating for it so strongly. That's why we're making all these videos. That's why I'm traveling the state of South Carolina and the country, for that matter, talking about this. And then I said, so the other key point that I want to break is I carry a shovel intentionally. I carry a shovel intentionally. You know why? And here's the responses, okay? 2 out of 3 responded by saying something like, yeah, we get it. If we're going to get this done, we have to do something. All of us have to work together. And I said, that's right. That's right. I've got this shovel, and I will work my fingers to the bone shoveling next to you to clear the swamp and move the mountains. But if you're not going to pick up a shovel and at least shovel a little bit, no. And it's not going to work. That's the whole problem. That's one of the main things. That's the main trait that we've, you know, been going down for forever, is that we take some person and we, you know, say, well, you're going to go do this for us. And that doesn't work. Okay? And we know this doesn't work because it has not been working for decades and decades and decades, and in fact for humanity for centuries. Okay? Those people that are willing to go through the gauntlet of trying to get elected in the current election paradigm, they're the very worst people. Okay, we're going to talk here in a little bit. We'll touch on their traits again to remind, but also for those people that haven't watched the other videos, to, you know, explain where we're coming from. All right, so so that was 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 responded in that way. The other third of them said, well, you know, I get it. We're clear the swamp, so we have to shovel. And then I explained the other part of it. No, we're all going to have to pitch in. We all have to participate. It's important that we participate, okay? And then I said, and it's not going to be like, we're not going to have to shovel a lot. We're not talking about, you know, hours or months or years of effort on individuals' parts. This is a small amount of effort on each of our parts. But the main effort is to listen to each other, the extraordinary, ordinary people, and stop listening to all of the horrible rhetoric and stuff coming from the leaders of our political parties. And again, and so some of the other things that I mentioned, and again, to clarify with the folks listening or watching to this show, when we talk about these horrible NARSOLES and the association with the political parties, we are not talking about the average person, okay? The extraordinary, ordinary people like you and I. We are not talking about, we are talking about these people, the NARSOLES, that gravitate toward the leadership of the political parties, that gravitate toward, running the gauntlet of trying to run for the U.S. Senate or something, or the House of Representatives in the current paradigm, because they want the brass ring. They want to be able to manipulate the rest of us, get insider trading information for stocks and all of this stuff that the current horrible people that we have in Washington are doing. All right. And so I just a couple other thoughts on this before we move to the actual topic and start talking about this philosophical discussion about whether or not NARSOLES are really human. I had one guy I ran into, and he was, he said, "Oh, I was a poli-sci major in college," and as I was talking to him, he's like, "You're absolutely right," and he goes, "Oh, this is very interesting." He said, "And yes, it was, I think, Washington and Adams. I mean, they were all of the founders had great concerns about political parties and their existence, but he said, if memory serves, Adams and Washington were specifically very, very, very adamant that this was going to be a problem." And I've mentioned in previous shows, and I mentioned to folks as I was talking to them, yes, you can look in Washington's farewell address, which is a lengthy document, and as I've said in other shows, not the easiest read, but it's in there. He talks about political parties and how the worst among us will try to divide the country, okay? And he is very clear if you read his farewell address. There's pages, okay? This thing, at least in the version that I have, is 26 pages long, and there's got to be like at least 5 or 6 pages about the political parties and how awful they're going to be, and how he is very interested in them not existing, and or at least not having any influence on the rest of us. Okay, so that was the visit to the Frosty Farmer Winter Market, and I ended up talking to, I'm not quite sure, I attempted to talk to, I think, roughly 70 people is my best estimate, and only maybe 4 or 5 people was like, I understand what you're doing, but no, I'm busy, I don't want to hear this. The rest of them were very open, enthusiastic, and just one particular gentleman. So I'm almost 65 years old. This fellow looked to me like he was maybe 20 years older than me. And as I first approached, and again, I was careful to approach with clear the swamp, move the mountain side of the shovel pointing, so people could see that and the hat. And I think that generally got me, the openness from them to at least listen for a bit. So I walked up to this fellow and I started talking to him, and I said, again, I apologize, and the instant that you don't want to talk to me anymore, just let me know and I will be out of here. I have no interest in getting you angry or get you upset or anything like that. And you could see on his face when I first walked up, he was like feeling irritated and kind of had that look on his face like someone comes up to you and you're like, oh geez, someone is going to be trying to sell me something or whatever, and I didn't ask to be approached. So he's got that kind of look on his face. And then I start talking to him. And all the things that I won't go over it again, all the sort of things I just talked about, I was saying to him. And you could see his face change from, some kind of level of irritation that I had approached him, to kind of you could see the wheels turning in his head, and he was like, oh, this is interesting. And then, so by the end of this discussion, and again, it lasts, a minute or two. By the end, he was very, his face had totally changed, and he was like warm and appreciative. And he said words to that effect. He's like, well, this is actually a very great idea. And I gave him one of the cards, and he said, I will look into this. This is something that I think maybe could really be, useful and positive. So I just wanted to relay that was the kind of experience. This thing, and I've said this in other shows, and I'm sure I'll say it again in some other shows as we go forward. The Citizen Statesmanship Initiative, whatever you want to call it, the paradigm, whatever we're going to call this thing, it's out of the bag, in the sense that, there's hundreds of videos that are kind of getting toward this, and dozens of podcasts now. I'm sure there'll be hundreds of podcasts eventually, and hundreds and hundreds and as many people, thousands, tens of thousands, millions eventually, hopefully soon, that will have heard about this and thought through it more and more, and realized, as us on this small growing team that we're part of, that this is the real deal. This is a real thing, and it will absolutely help us march forward toward a far brighter tomorrow, free of hate, fear, and injustice. And I know that sounds like a very bold claim, but it's not. And as you think about it more and more, all of you EOP out there, as you watch our programs or listen to them and think through this more and more, we're certain that you will, as we have done, our growing, admittedly small but growing team. This is the solution. This is the cure for what ails us. This is the antibiotic for our infection. This is the perfectly tailored chemotherapy for our cancer. This is the wildly effective vaccinations that we've had for smallpox and polio. This is it. This is the cure for what ails us. Citizen statesmanship. Okay, so now, having gone through that aside, I have to be a little bit careful here. I've got this shovel on the set here, and I got to make sure I get it just right. Otherwise, it might fall over and damage me or something else. All right. So now on to the topic of, are NARSOLES human? Well, what triggered this question was just a thought. And this is the thought. Are truly wicked, nasty people like Hitler, or serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer or John Wayne Gacy, are they really human? After all, their actions definitely would meet the definition of the adjective inhuman, right? Hitler and all the things that they did, and Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy and dozens of other serial killers over the years, their actions are inhuman, right? So what does it mean to be human? Are there only physical traits that we should be thinking about, or do we equally consider mental and psychological traits? So what do you think out there in our audience? What do you think about this? Is being human only the bones and the blood and the skin and the hair and all that stuff? Or is there a big component of it that is mental and psychological? And would you think of Hitler and Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy and other horrible, clearly horrible people? Would you think of them as being human or not? So, we wanted to, and we talked about the NARSOLES and the extraordinary ordinary people. And it occurred to me the other day that we had not emphasized the traits of the extraordinary ordinary people. And this is, again, going back to the Frosty Farmers Market. I would talk to people, I'd say, you know, thank you for being an extraordinary ordinary person. And they would say, oh, I'm not all that extraordinary. And this is the thing. And I would stop them and I would say, no, no, ma'am, or no, sir. You are extraordinary. You just don't recognize, or we don't, we're modest, right? One of the traits that we, the extraordinary ordinary people, have is we're modest. We're, you know, reasoned, you know, appropriately, you know, self-aware and aware of others and so on. And but one of the traits for sure is a bit of modesty, right? And so there's other traits, of course. So I want to just touch upon those because, and as I do this, I guarantee you, the vast majority of people that either are watching or listening will say, yeah, that's kind of me, okay? So the traits of the extraordinary ordinary people, okay? So one of them is a general openness. So some curiosity, some use of imagination, some willingness to try some new things. Of course, there's a spectrum on all this, and some people are, you know people that will try anything, and then you know people that are more conservative and don't want to try too much stuff. But there's always some curiosity and willingness to try new things, including, ding, 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 citizen statesmanship, to replace how we've traditionally identified and elected people into government office for centuries, right? There's a conscientiousness, okay? So people are organized and responsible and goal-driven kinds of things. Again, always a spectrum of us. There's a little bit of extroversion. So this is this extroverted versus introverted thing. And again, a spectrum. I'm actually naturally a bit of an introvert, more than a bit of an introvert, kind of a fairly solid introvert. But what I've learned in my almost 60 years or 65 years on the planet is, you know, sometimes even though it's not a comfortable thing, you still have to do it. Okay? You still have to do it. And so I was in the military for a while, and clearly, you know, you have to be able to express yourself. And I'm doing these things, and actually after I went to the Frosty Farmers Market thing, and I was approaching people for like 2 hours and talking to them, right? Well, after that 2 hours was over, I was like, I was delighted. I enjoyed the conversations. I had great conversations with people. People were warm and friendly and appreciative, and I was warm and friendly and appreciative towards them, and it was a great experience. But having said all of that, once it was over and I was leaving the market area where these folks were, I was like, I'm glad that that's over, because this is not a natural thing for me. And I apologize because it probably comes through on the shows from time to time. And I apologize for that. Again, we're just regular folk, and I am what I am. And you are what you are, but we all are extraordinary, ordinary people. There's just a spectrum. And some of us have strengths and weaknesses in different places, right? Okay, So there's an agreeableness. So some compassion, some kindness, and trust. Again, that's us, right? And there's also some neuroticism, which is a fancy word for saying that you can have some anxiety and some moodiness and maybe a little bit of emotional instability. Okay, and again, there's a spectrum of us. So a lot of those traits, of course, are very positive, and then some of them are a little bit less positive, but that's us. Okay, and the vast majority of you out there listening, you're going to recognize those traits. Now, the narsole traits are the combination of narcissistic traits and sociopathic traits. And we've covered this many times on the show, and there's a long list here, but I'm going to just hit some of the highlights. So the narcissistic traits are that there's a huge sense of self-importance. Okay, again, the opposite of modesty, right? There's a preoccupation with power, beauty, and success. They feel entitled. Okay, they're arrogant. They don't have empathy, and they feel like they must be admired. All right, and there's some other traits, but again, those are some of the highlights. The sociopathic traits, and as I mentioned, those narcissistic traits, again, the vast majority of people, like 98% of the people that would eventually listen or watch this, you're going to say, that's not me. I don't feel entitled. I don't have this big sense of self-importance. I am empathetic. I am not arrogant. I'm modest, right? All right, so now the sociopathic traits. Okay, manipulating and deceitful. We covered this in other shows, but we, the extraordinary people, are not manipulating and deceitful, and that's the reason why these lie detector tests work on most people, because most people are us, and most people it bothers us. There's this internal moral standard. And I could, if I wanted to go on a real tangent, I could go talk about that for quite a while. But there is this internal compass inside the vast majority of us, and being deceitful is a problem for us, but not for the narsoles. They're impulsive and irresponsible. They can be extremely aggressive and violent. They can have a disregard for rules and laws. So Hitler and Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy, disregard for rules and laws? Yeah, you think? They can have a superficial charm. And this is one of the key attributes that they have. They can be charming, but it's superficial. And this is one of the ways that like a Jeffrey Dahmer or a John Wayne Gacy could be charming with people and get them into a place where they can no longer protect themselves and be attacked and killed by these serial killers. But they used charm like a spider, well, not like a spider, but they used charm to reel in their victims. Well, the narsoles, the grand narsoles, the political leaders, and many of our corporate leaders are very similar. They use superficial charm. They tell us all about how much they care about us and want us to, and whatever it is that you want, I will do. Oh, that's important. I understand that. I will do that when I'm in Washington. And then they lie, right? Which is the last thing that I want to say. They're pathological liars. Okay? And again, we are not. The extraordinary people are not. So these people, these are the differences. So as to this philosophical question then, so in my mind, and I'm going to give you my opinion, but my opinion is just one opinion. And you, I want, as I asked the question earlier on, what do you think about this? Is being human, is it just the physical traits? Like, walking around on two legs and having hands and feet and, all this other stuff? And, or is there a mental and psychological trait as well? And would the very worst among us, like Hitler and Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy and other, like, obviously horrible, 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 horrible people, are they humans? I had, and so I'm going to actually, since we're on a little bit of a philosophical discussion here, I'm going to take a little tangent here. Because one of the things that I was wondering, and I've heard other people ask this question, and you can see again philosophers ask this question and then talk about what the answer might be. And the question is, again, on this little bit of a tangent, why are we even here as humans? Why are we even here? You know, does life have any meaning to it? It just happens that we were born and we live, you know, whatever arc of a life, and then we die and then that's it? Or is there more? Is there more to it than that? And there's many, many, many people of us think that there is more to that. And whether you feel like it's a religious thing, and one of the many ways that you believe in God and approach your belief in God, and again in a country and in the world, and certainly the citizen statesmanship movement strongly advocates that people should be allowed to approach God in their way and let that relationship grow and prosper or not, just as individuals, okay, approaching their faith. But if you believe, and I was raised as a Catholic, and it does feel to me like there definitely could be or is kind of this greater grand thing. But then, and for example, in the Catholic religion, you're born and then you go through various rituals and things as part of the church, and then you die, and then you go to heaven or hell, depending on whether where you were accepted by God and by Christ and into his welcoming arms, kinds of things, and all based on your deeds, but also your willingness to accept forgiveness and confess your sins and so on. But why go through all that hassle if you're gonna? Why even need a physical life if that is some kind of variant of that is the vision for humanity? So your soul is kind of created. Why do you even need to have the physical life? Why not just go from a soul is created to, you're now in heaven? Why go through this period of time on this physical earth? And as I contemplate that, it is my belief that we are here to learn what it means to be human. And so in my view, being a physical being is only half of what it means to be human. And the other half is, appreciating and exemplifying and learning also, but those traits of curiosity and imagination and responsibility and sociability and kindness and trust and compassion, those are the other parts. And to me, at least from a philosophical standpoint, this would feel like the answer for why we have to go through this physical life before we again return to some kind of non-physical soul entity only. Okay, so now back again, staying in the philosophical bent, but returning to this question about whether or not the very worst among us are really human or not. So, really, I thought about this a lot, and as you know on the show, if you've watched or listened to some of our other shows, we why not? We use some of the artificial intelligence large models that exist that they do a fairly good job in summarizing some things, and so we asked ChatGPT about this question. Okay. Comprehensively discuss the traits and attributes of being human. Discuss both physical attributes and mental attributes, including common beliefs held by many humans. And the question is, if a small, tiny fraction of people on the planet had mental and personality traits and beliefs wildly different than the rest of us, would or should they be thought of as human? And so, and I agree, and we talked about this already, so there's physical attributes, right? So, and again, for the purposes of not boring people and going and spending a lot of time, of course, we have our bodies, right? And we stand upright and we walk and all those kinds of things, and we have our brains, and we have our capacity to do physical things and mental things. And again, there's a spectrum of that for all of us, but we all have capabilities. And then you start talking about the mental and psychological attributes, and we have these abilities again to use language and think about things both physically, physical things, but abstract things and so on. And we have emotional range, as we talked about before, like love and compassion and anger and fear and joy and humor and so on. And we have these social instincts, like forming tribes or families or communities, and developing shared norms, the norms being how we kind of agree on how we're going to get along on a day-to-day basis. And we, have laws and moral systems and so on, and methods. We adopt methods for punishing and rewarding behaviors and so on. And so the long and short of it is, when you get down to it, this thing said, well, should all people, even like the nastiest of the nasty, like Hitler and Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy, these examples that I've used several times already in this show, should they be thought of as human? And as much as I would like to say no, because there's a big component of them that is inhuman, that meets the definition of that word, they are in the end human. Now, having said this, just because they're human does not in any way imply that we have to listen to them, especially when they belong to the small fraction of us that are the worst among us, especially them. We don't have to listen to them. And then secondly, as of course we know, especially the so-called petty versions of NARSOLES, the small-time ones, the ones that only affect, as we've said in other shows, handfuls of people, like Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy and other countless, credit card fraud people and bank robbers and rapists and all these other things. Of course, if these people, if humans are doing bad things, then we need to, stop them from doing that. So we need, to police that and punish them, or rehabilitate them or whatever, right? But like Hitler, And the other grand NARSOLES is the term that we've come up with for the more publicly oriented ones, the ones that affect us by the hundreds of thousands and millions and even billions. These people, one, we don't need to elect them to political office, and two, we don't need to listen to them. We need to stop listening to these people. Remember the superficial charm and the constant lying. Oh, that's not good. Got an alarm. Hold on. I forgot I had an alarm set. We definitely don't need to listen to them. And in fact, in the case of Hitler, and I've mentioned this in previous shows, I lived in Germany for almost 3 years, and the German people are wildly aware of how Hitler manipulated them. The fundamental, average, common, everyday, extraordinary, ordinary Germans, they're just like you and me. They are. But they recognize, okay, they have the history in their country, and they recognize what Adolf Hitler did to manipulate them into doing. And of course, people actually did those things, and they punished, those people that did them. But they're absolutely hell-bent to avoid ever allowing any single person, any horrible person, from causing their society, causing them, the general people, to do those kinds of horrific things again. So they're wildly aware of this. And it's important that people recognize that the German people are an outstanding example of what bad things can happen to populations. And of course, there's dozens, hundreds and hundreds of examples across human history. But also, you can learn from your mistakes, and you can choose to do things differently. You can choose to say, this will never happen again. All right, so as we wind up the show, just a reminder that we on the Citizen Statesmanship team are just regular people, just like yourselves, and we know we've hit upon the solution to all the pain and suffering that we have experienced, caused by hate, fear, and injustice incited by our traditional leaders for decades and centuries. And again, in Greenville, as I went and I spoke to just randomly selected people in this frozen farmers market environment, they all get it. They agree. So now we've got to grow, you and I, start walking arm in arm toward a far brighter future free of hate, fear, and injustice. So our growing team's mission is to make our tomorrows much better. We are ambassadors and facilitators. Join us. Join us. Subscribe to our shows. Forward links to our shows to your friends and relatives and neighbors and people all around the world. This show, as we said at the beginning, this is for all of us, the extraordinary, ordinary people from all corners of the globe. Become ambassadors and facilitators yourselves. It can be fun. Not always, but it can be. But it is always fulfilling. It is always fulfilling. Write into the show at freeequalfair@gmail.com. Comments, questions, stories. Again, freeequalfair@gmail.com. Our next show is going to be fantastic. It's called Technology Tipping Points. Come join us, won't you?